In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, God is one. Amen. Christ is risen. A little bit late today, about a minute late. It's because everything you can imagine has sort of gone awry, including this camera here not working properly, and the computer itself not waking up properly, and me probably not waking up properly. Anyway, there we go. It's a nice day. And of course, today is the feast days of the apostles Barnabas and Bartholomew, about whom we've been reading about St. Barnabas, of course, the last little while. So that's been quite exciting. And now we have St. Bartholomew as well, who some people say is the same person as Nathaniel in the Bible, who the Lord chose, one who the Lord saw under his fig tree and chose from there. We don't really know, but it is likely, and as you know, the Lord had a habit of changing people's names and giving them new names and so on. So it's quite possible that Nathaniel is also known as Bartholomew, and it is a sort of surname. It means son of Ptolemy. At least that's what it can mean, and Ptolemy is obviously, as in the Roman Greek name, Ptolemy, the person who accompanied Alexander the Great, or the Great Satan, depending where you live, on his travels, and then took over Egypt. So quite an interesting group of people. Bartholomew, what we know about him, well, for absolute certain, not a great deal. Certain things we are told, like for instance, he went and visited India, by which we could mean northern Yemen or even Ethiopia. All of those were regarded as being India back then. We don't know. And then he ended his life in Azerbaijan, either being crucified upside down and then burned, or flayed alive and then crucified and burned, or crucified, flayed and burned. Each of which are pretty horrific. And sometimes you'll discover that each of these things happened according to, anyway, there we are, horrible. And Bartholomew, of course, Barnabas rather, we're reading about at the moment as he's going around with St. Paul. So two great saints, both of them well known to the Lord and knowing the Lord well, and both of them evangelists throughout the world. It's a shame, really, that we don't have extra additions to Acts of the Apostles as opposed to just Acts of the Apostle Paul. This would be a very helpful thing, really. Anyway, there we are. Quite a lot of what we think we know comes several hundred years after their deaths. So you have all the inaccuracies and so on associated with that. Anyway, people are arriving. So there's Subdeacon Ahmed there. Christ is risen indeed. And Bev, good morning. Helia, also the Feast of Chinese Martyrs. Yes, indeed, of the Boxer Rebellion, I think. And then Dewey, Simeon, Gary, good morning, all three of you. And Penelope, Christ is risen. Simon, good morning to you, Simon, with your mixture of German and French. Frank, good morning. Christ is risen, it's my privilege. Miss Connie, all the way from Australia, so good evening. Christ is risen, returning from 1,000-kilometer pilgrimage to an underground Orthodox church in the desert. Ooh, that's exciting. Tell us where it was so we can all enjoy hopefully looking at pictures of it on the internet later on. That'll be interesting. I always find it exciting the way that Orthodox in different parts of the world make use of whatever they've got. And the people meeting in what are obviously converted offices, shops, we have an ex-Anglican church here, garages, building sheds in the back gardens. There's a very nice series of pictures from some Australian priest who's building a shed church in his back garden. Clever fellow, doing it all himself. Anyway, there we go. So have a happy feast today. And of course, Christ has risen. We can say that only for another couple of days because the ascension is almost upon us. Kuba Pidi, South Australia, Serbian Orthodox Church. Kuba Pidi. I'll try and remember that. That's probably not how to pronounce it. Serbian Orthodox Church, South Australia, Kuba Pidi. Right, good. I've not brought a pen out here. That's foolish of me. Anyway, maybe we'll need one later on. Now, though, what we need to do is read Acts chapter 13. I'm very exhausting this bit, verses 14 to 17. So not a large amount to read, but surprisingly a large amount to say. So St. Paul and his party have set sail to Paphos. They've arrived there. They've come to Pergia in Pamphylia. John Mark has gone back to Jerusalem, and they then go from Perga, verse 14. And when they had departed from Perga, they came to Antioch in Pisidia, and went into the synagogue on the Sabbath day and sat down. And after the reading of the law and the prophets, the rulers of the synagogue sent to them, saying, Men and brethren, if you have any word of exhortation for the people, say on. Then Paul stood up and motioning with his hand said, Men of Israel, and you who fear God, listen. The God of this people Israel chose our fathers and exalted the people when they dwelt as strangers in the land of Egypt, and with an uplifted arm he brought them out of it. And that's as far as we're going to read today. It's quite exciting. Good morning, Natalia. God bless you. So let's start off bit by bit. So verses 14 and 15. I've just read this, but our tradition is to read them all over again. When they departed from Perga, they came to Antioch in Pisidia and went down into the synagogue on the Sabbath day and sat down. And after the reading of the law and the prophets, the ruler of the synagogue said to them, saying, Men and brethren, if you have any word of exhortation for the people, say on. So Antioch in Pisidia, not the other Antioch, after which the Antiochian Patriarchate is named and used to be based. This is another Antioch. There were lots of them, actually, because one of the people who took over from Alexander the Great's empire, Antiochus IV Epiphanes, had lots of cities named after him by his sons and other heirs. So you have Antioch that we know about and various other Antiochs in other places, all of whom are named after this Antiochus. This particular Antioch is now a ruin, and there are no big towns, no big cities there, because it was not really on a trade route. It was in a plateau. There's not much in the way of rain there, but they can get water from the river, which is alongside. So they had to water everything from there. And also it doesn't have a typical Mediterranean climate, being quite high up and beyond a range of mountains. So not necessarily the best place to live. And as a result, people moved. It's rather like where I used to live in the monastery in Gatton. It was the only house left of a small village. It's such a difficult place to live in that everybody in the end chose not to live there. And the other cottages and houses, cottages really, some of them hovels, had all fallen down, except for the house that we lived in. So there we are. It was, however, a strategic base which could be used as a place to put soldiers to keep the local area in control, to make sure there are no bandits or anybody else hanging out there that could then invade other parts of their empire. And that's really what it was that caused the place to grow. So a fairly barren sort of area, but once you get a strategic base, then other people move in, and it becomes a cultural and business center, servicing the soldiers and then all the other people who are looking after them. Oh, Ahmed says, been to the ruins of that particular Antioch. It was quite chilly indeed. Yeah, I've not been there, but I was having a jolly good read about it earlier on today. And thinking, I don't think I like that place much. I don't like it cold. I don't like it too hot either, but there we go. Too cold here today. We've not had any summer. Uh, it's very odd. Anyway, so it became a culture and business centre, and like so many places where you have a culture and business centre and so on, you get immigrants from all over the world turning up there, and some of those immigrants were Jewish. And like all immigrants everywhere, they build their own particular churches, synagogues, temples, and other things if they have leave to do so. And here they have built themselves a synagogue. Now, Paul and Barnabas and their companions go off to the synagogue on Saturday. They still are basically Jewish. And it was many decades before Christianity and Judaism parted ways. For a long time, several decades, 30 odd years, Christianity was a sect within Judaism, which is why it is you have all these problems about circumcision and so on, and bringing and converting Judaism to Christianity and bringing other people into Christianity, but not quite into Judaism. So they go into a synagogue. It is the practice of the apostles, and we know it was the practice of the Lord to go to the synagogue on Saturday and to preach if he was invited to do so. And with St. Paul, Barnabas and co, this is the same thing. Okay? So they then would have had a service, and the service itself is quite interesting. So it is in several different parts, A, B, C, D, E, and F. And so go through those different parts because it shows us how synagogue worship developed into Christian worship as well, into church worship. Quite an interesting thing about the synagogue, just as an aside, really. And that is this, that obviously most Jewish worship, even at that time, was centered on a temple in Jerusalem. That is where the daily, weekly, monthly, festal and annual sacrifices took place. And Jewish people, if they're able to on the great high holidays, would go up to Jerusalem to take part in those particular sacrifices and festivals, watching on from afar. But most people, of course, would be at home in whatever village or town or whatever it was, that city that they were in, and therefore they built a local meeting place where they congregated. And you had this congregation. And that was an interesting thing because everybody knew that God took part in the temple worship. But in the synagogues, they began realizing that wherever the congregation was, wherever the people were, God took part in that as well. And God was present with them. So there's a shift in theological understanding about really where God inhabited. God inhabited everywhere, but he also inhabited that particular, where the people were, he was there too. When the congregation joined, they were there too. And you find that is a constant sort of thing within the New Testament. You know, you have the ecclesia, the church, and where the church is, there Christ is. As the Lord himself says, where two or three are gathered together, I am in the midst of you. The word midst has got a particular meaning I'm surrounding and with you and so on, rather than standing next to you. He binds us together. So the Jewish synagogue softened up the Jews to the idea of the church, the ecclesia. And much church worship is actually synagogue worship. Not surprising, really, when you think that certainly St. Paul and almost certainly Barnabas were Pharisees. We think that Barnabas was also, like Paul, trained by Gamaliel. And these two great apostles of the Gentiles going out everywhere, Pharisee style worship, synagogue worship continued, obviously with a big injection from temple worship as well. Okay, so what happened during the service? Well, it began with the Shema Israel. The words are, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one." There's another translation of that. That is, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord alone." So the oneness of God, the God is the God of Israel, and to hear, i.e. to obey God as well. St. Benedict famously began his works with "hear." And we're going to hear in a moment that St. Paul begins his sermon with these same words, "Hear, listen." It says here, "listen," but actually it says "hear" in Greek. Listen to this, hear this. And the Jewish people sitting there would have heard an echo of the start of their service. The Shema continues on to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. And that, of course, was also the central part of a teaching of the Lord. He based his talk to a young lawyer about this as well. At that stage, we think they also read the bits from Numbers telling them to wear tefillin, which are little boxes on their head and on their hand, yad. The yad is actually from here to here. And in fact, they wear it there because it points towards, now they wear it here, so it points towards the heart. So to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your strength, with all your might, and so on. And so it points towards there as well. And it ties right the way around until it reaches your hand. And so they keep the rules in that way. It also tells you to keep this rule on your head, on your hand, on your doorposts, and on your gates. If you go into a Jewish house, an Orthodox Jewish house, even nowadays, you'll find a little thing called a mezuzah, which is often very decorated and very pretty. And inside there is a little tiny scroll that actually says this very thing. And it is put sideways on a slope, so that way around as far as you're looking, on all the doorposts throughout the entire house. Visiting a friend of mine who's an Orthodox rabbi, every time we went in and out of every room, he touched the mezuzah. So constant memorial of the presence of God with you. So there's constantly keeping God in your mind. The other thing that was in the same Shema was about the wearing of tassels on the corners of your clothing. The tassels were quite long, about this long. They had a blue thread running through them. And the idea of that was to keep in remembrance the law, the 613 precepts of the law of Israel. Keep all of this in your mind so that you're surrounded, as it were, on the four corners of your clothes, if you can think of such a thing. So two in front and two behind, these tassels that remind you to keep the law. So all of these different types of reminders were there to enable Jewish people to live, as it were, continually within the law. Like we might say nowadays, we should abide in communion. We receive communion on feast days and Sundays and maybe Saturdays and other days during the week. But the understanding of that is that we should live in communion. We should abide in communion all the time and have God constantly in our hearts and our minds, just like it says in the Shema. And that communion we have, a spiritual and actual communion, physical and actual communion with God, keeps us on the straight and narrow. Okay? Not difficult to imagine. So that is part one. Part 2, we're not certain, but we think that at that stage, certainly shortly afterwards, there were various blessings that took place. Let God be gracious unto us and bless us and shine a light his countenance upon us and have mercy upon us. That was a specifically priestly blessing that was said in the temple morning by morning after the sacrifice. The priest would come out and bless the congregation with those words. Certainly after the destruction of the temple in 70 AD, that was added into the whole business of the temple, the synagogue worship. We're not certain about whether it predated that. But again, you can see within Christianity all of these different types of blessings that we now have during different parts of different services have crept from the synagogue into the temple into our own worship. So that's part B. Part C was a reading from the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible, the Torah, from the Torah scrolls. They're kept in a special cupboard called an ark above the bema, the high place. This is usually translated into Greek because nobody actually spoke Hebrew then, or very few people did, and so that people would understand it in the language they normally used. In other places that they didn't speak Greek, they translated into the local language. And it's through that translation that we have an accurate understanding of what the Hebrew means and how Jewish people have relearned Hebrew as well. Everybody who did the translation not only knew Greek fluently, but they also knew Hebrew fluently, and therefore able to translate from one to the other fluently, saying exactly what the meaning was one way and another. So when people translate now from Hebrew into English or some other language, if they're not using Septuagint understanding, which is a type of, then actually sometimes they're missing the point. They're mistranslating, misunderstanding. From the Pentateuch, they had to read 21 verses or more. Sometimes a great deal more, but the Mishnah says they had to read at least 21 verses. So that's quite a long passage from the Torah. Following that, they read from the prophets. So after the first 5 books of the Bible end, all the others, the prophets, they almost certainly then read or sang portions or the whole Psalms, probably one after the next, and also according to season and feast and so on. Different Psalms had different things going on within them. And then at the end of all of that, they recited a thing called the Kaddish, which was a song of praise towards God, who had just spoken to them through the scriptures. And that is a lovely way of thinking about that. When we read the scriptures, God is speaking to us. He's speaking to us through the scripture itself. Something we don't often think about. And often when people are studying the scriptures in a sort of academic way, they forget the purpose of it. And the purpose of the scripture is so that God can, he's written us letters, as it were. Now we can actually read those and see what it is that he wants us to know. The Kaddish went something like this. Magnified and sanctified be his great name in the world, which he hath created according to his will. May he establish his kingdom during your life, during your days, and during the life of the house of Israel, even speedily and at a near time. And you can see within this prayer a sort of echo of the Lord's Prayer. Not entirely, but you can see that there are aspects that are very similar. The one actually could be a commentary on the other. And then finally, after all of that, there would be a talk from the rabbi. the talk from the rabbi was extra, added on, when actually the service itself had finished. And he would talk according to his own ability, everybody would listen, and then talk with him about it. It was not something that was just left there, he carried on talking about it. Rather in the same sort of way that on Sundays I might preach a sermon, and then afterwards over breakfast, people ask me questions about it. Father, what did you mean when you said? In one church where I was the priest, I'd be heckled. That's one person particularly, may his memory be eternal, who used to literally shout me down. I have to say, well, I'm sorry, I'm quoting directly from St. John Chrysostom here. So if you don't like it, it's St. John Chrysostom that you are arguing with. Anyway, there we are. So some sort of sermon. And so we have each of those little bits there. So part 1, the Shema, part 2, possibly blessings, part 3, the reading from the Pentateuch, the Torah, part 4, the prophets, part 5, the Kaddish, the praise of God, and part 6, some sort of sermon. Then I guess everybody's sort of push off home. Had enough of you now, go home. Go and eat your sandwiches and drink tea from your samovar. So that is the background of what St. Paul and St. Barnabas and their party are doing. And of course, like here, if suddenly the congregation doubled in size and over coffee, we finished the service, you might say to everybody, so who are you guys? Tell us about yourselves. And this is the rabbi's mistake. He says to them, what does he say? He says, men and brethren, if you have any word of exhortation for the people, say on. Tell us, what have you got that's good to say? Then Paul stood up and motioning with his hand said, men of Israel, and you who fear God, listen. So, St. Paul, interestingly, isn't it? It's interesting, it's St. Paul now. Barnabas has been the person who's done a lot of the stuff beforehand, but now definitely it's St. Paul. And from now on, it's going to be St. Paul. And Luke is going to concentrate on St. Paul in a big way. But St. Barnabas, the one who actually knew Christ and went around with him, found St. Paul and brought him back, who quite possibly knew St. Paul, especially if, as we think, he was also trained by Gamaliel, so a classmate of St. Paul, is beginning to take a slightly back seat as far as we're concerned. And St. Paul is being pushed forward. So the better of the two preachers is the one who does it. And St. Paul starts where they are. And his first words are, men of Israel. So he's talking to this group, first of all, the children of Israel. So this is the first group, Jewish people. And then secondly, and you who fear God. These are ex-Gentile believers. So the two lot. Do you remember Cornelius is called a God-fearer? This is what it says here as well. So Cornelius is not Jewish, but he feared God. And so they're talking to Jewish people and God-fearers. And what does he say? He says, listen, or hear, like the Shema, Shema Israel. Hear, listen to this. And that, as I said earlier on, would immediately have an echo in their mind. Also, actually, calling them God-fearers as opposed to proselytes bumps them up a stage. Proselytes had a slightly bad name, just like very often, if people are cradle Orthodox, they talk about converts, even like convert has been around much longer than they've been alive, with a sneer in their voice. And that's why that can be a big problem. But also proselytes would have been said with a slight sneer in the voice, whereas St. Paul is not doing that. He's saying people who fear God. He's giving them a nice title, a nice positive way about talking about somebody. Okay, it says here, you guys, listen, men of Israel, listen, proselytes. Go straight back into the Shema. Okay, then he says, the God of this people Israel chose our fathers and exalted the people when they dwelt as strangers in the land of Egypt, and with an uplifted arm he brought them out of it. And this again is St. Paul starting where they already are. He begins his proclamation of the gospel from something they all know very well. And he goes right to the very foundation, chose our fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Israel. So he begins there, and he makes it clear that they're chosen. So again, they have a nice warm feeling in their chest. We are the chosen people. We begin with that sort of thing in their mind. And then he doesn't say who became slaves in Egypt. He says who were exalted in Egypt. He remembers Joseph becoming exalted and becoming Pharaoh's right-hand man, but he doesn't dwell on the idea that they were slaves at this point. Of course, they're exalted in numbers as well. They grew hugely in numbers. And then he says, who dwelt as strangers in the land of Egypt. In other words, they were not corrupted by Egypt. They were separated out from them. They didn't fully inhabit Egypt and all its blandishments and all the things that went wrong there too. And then finally he goes on and says, with a strong arm he led them out. So again, he's referring now not only to the founding fathers, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but also now he's referring to the Passover. So he's softening them up with all the great things that these Jewish people and the God-fearers already know about Judaism, the founding episodes in Hebrew/Jewish history he's bringing to mind. So immediately they'll be on his side and thinking, and if they're able to cheer, they could cheer at the end of each phrase. So the God of this people, huzzah, Israel, chose our fathers, huzzah, exalted the people, huzzah, when they dwelt as strangers in the land of Egypt, huzzah, with uplifted arm he brought them out of it. 3 cheers to that one. So they're all of them feeling pretty good and looking forward to drinking their coffee and having their bagels at the end of the service. You probably wouldn't have done that then, but anyway, that's where we're going to leave that. Okay, so an awful lot in a very little bit, and you can see from there the way that our own worship developed. Right, let us keep in prayer, people. We've got somebody here who announces his name is Jesus the Truth, which is true. Christ is risen. Pray for you. God bless you and keep you. We've got other people turning up. Ahmed has already told us he's Chile in Antioch. I wonder what you were doing there. Stella, good morning. Sometime since I've seen you on there. Sorry you're joining very late. Not to worry, it's lovely to see you there. I was drinking out of your mug only yesterday and saying to myself, I wonder what's become of that Stella. Anton, woohoo! Long time not seen. Yes, indeed. Well, God bless you and keep you. And Nicoletta. Good morning, Nicoletta. God bless you and keep you. Hope you're doing well. Right, some people to pray for. Pray for little Joachim, who is a very tiny baby, very premature, very difficult start to life. So please pray for him. Nicholas, who is increasingly ill. Daniel, who is a youngster who is very ill. It looks as if Ahmed is getting better. We'll carry on praying for you, Ahmed, until you're fully well. And then others like Dino's Simon and Erin's Joseph and Christina's Elizabeth, who we keep in our prayers, and also you, Jesus is the truth, which is true, and pray for you this morning as well. God bless you and keep you. There's also a presbyterian to pray for, and whose name I'll keep to myself, and of course the King and the Princess of Wales, if you pray for them as well for their speedy recovery. And then loads of people planning to have elections over the next little while. We need to keep all these folk in our prayers, because who gets elected in different countries affects everybody in the end. Okay, that's enough for today. God willing, hopefully we'll carry on from there tomorrow. I don't think anybody else is saying anything. I'm going to look up this interesting place, the Serbian church at Kuba Purdy in South Australia, in a minute, and that'll be exciting as well. So, Kuba Purdy. There we are, Kuba Purdy. It's a place that exists. Right, your prayers. God bless you and keep you. God willing, tomorrow. God bless you, Miss Connie. Thank you for that. I shall spend a few minutes excitedly looking at that. Your prayers. Bye-bye. Lord have mercy.